Bang after bang after bang. Let's face facts, this looks absolutely spectacular. Call of Duty Modern Warfare is back, no longer a numbered entry in the series as the original game was, but a full reboot. The start of something new, built from the ground up using a spectacularly revamped Infinity Ward engine, the result of 5 years of intense research and development from some of the most talented engineers in the business. As you can see, the results show. So, Tom and Alex have already covered off the PS4 and PS4 Pro versions of Modern Warfare, and we actually received that code a day ahead of Xbox, if you're wondering why we went for the Sony platforms first. I shall be covering the Microsoft machines here predominantly, but I don't think the coverage is going to be quite complete without referring back to their Sony counterparts. So expect a jumbo-sized series of head-to-heads throughout this video. And look, before I go on, I want to stress why Modern Warfare, why this new release is a big deal, why the series is so important, and how what we're getting here is a piece of technology designed to scale. Now, when I say that, I mean, well, it runs on Xbox One S all the way up to the ray tracing enabled $1,000 GPU that is the RTX 2080 Ti. But the new engine goes beyond that. With Modern Warfare, Infinity Ward's tech hub are laying the foundations for the next generation of Call of Duty titles. As to why this series is so important, well, let's take a look back at the original last-gen franchise debut. Infinity Ward rewrote the rules of the first-person shooter way back in 2007, seeking to lock gameplay to 60 frames per second in an era where performance wasn't really that great, or indeed that much of a focus, and most console FPS games aim for 30 frames per second instead. Battlefield, Halo, all the heavyweights, all of them now target 60 frames per second because fundamentally the original Modern Warfare demonstrated spectacularly that the more visual feedback you have, the lower the latency is in the human to game interface, and therefore the better the experience. Fast forward to 2016 and we have Raven Games' Modern Warfare Remastered. Effectively a retread of the original game in content terms, yes, but also built on what was the current gen version of the Call of Duty engine, which made its spectacular debut back in 2014's Advanced Warfare. Impressive stuff and a generational leap in many ways, but still more of an evolution rather than a revolution. Of course, I've got to drop in Call of Duty Black Ops here from Treyarch, where the developer went on a very different technological journey to the other Call of Duty studios. But this is Modern Warfare, the new game, and here it's running on Xbox One X in 4K output mode, and I think it's a profoundly impressive, genuinely remarkable leap in technology. So I've now played the game across all 4 console formats to varying degrees, and I do have a handle on how it all compares. It's interesting how a title that is fundamentally the same on all systems actually delivers quite a variance in the experience, and it all boils down to resolution and frame rate at the end of the day. The further you go up the console power ladder, the crisper the visuals become. In this respect, not much has changed from the beta, but let's run through the various versions. At the bottom end of the scale, we have Xbox One S, targeting a resolution of 1600 by 900 at the max, but utilising dynamic resolution scaling, something all versions of the game utilise. It bottoms out at a low 800 by 900 lower bounds on the DRS range there. The thing about this is that some elements of the presentation, specifically volumetrics, operate at a lower than native resolution, presenting some genuinely blocky scenes that don't really hold up. Infinity Ward's use of temporal supersampling and filmic SMAA can only go so far when there is a resolution deficit, and I think the Xbox One S generally falls under par. Base PlayStation 4 has the same horizontal dynamic resolution system as the Xbox, but runs at pixel counts between 960 by 1080 and full 1920 by 1080. The boost to overall clarity can be pretty profound actually, but it's worth stressing that everything is dynamic. Some scenes between the base machines stack up fairly well head to head, others show a night and day difference. Moving on to the enhanced machines, and there's the same combination of temporal supersampling, filmic SMAA and dynamic resolution scaling, with clarity adjusting according to the GPU power of the machines. Xbox One X scales on the horizontal axis only right now from 1920 by 2160 to full 3840 by 2160, while PlayStation 4 Pro shows the system able to scale both axes for more flexibility. And as we'll see later, this does pay off in performance terms. Modern Warfare is a filmic looking game. Aliasing is at a minimum, so while Xbox One X gains clarity, the bottom line is that the extra resolution doesn't present a monumentally improved level of image quality as such. This is something we also observed in Infinity Ward's last series entry, the underrated Infinite Warfare. Now, certainly across all systems, the key engine features are all present and correct. That begins with the new physically based materials pipeline, where all surfaces in the game react correctly and beautifully to the surrounding lighting conditions, and there are some uncanny results here, from the remarkably authentic weapons rendering to the representations of cloth and of course environmental surfaces. I mean, check out that brickwork there. Then there's the frankly astonishing level of detail, with Call of Duty now pushing more geometry than it ever has before, up to 5 times more in fact compared to prior Infinity Ward titles. This has a profound effect on the detail in the campaign especially, and the sheer richness inherent in the scenes is pretty phenomenal. Tom's already talked about that to a certain extent in his video, and in this debug footage direct from Infinity Ward you can see how geometry is culled to manage load on the GPU. Then there's the spectral rendering system, with everything in the game accurately rendered in both thermal and infrared spectrums, meaning that your airstrikes are more realistic than ever. And yes, that brilliant Camden-based siege-style incursion level looks absolutely beautiful, just as it should. Every light source in the game is capable of interacting with volumetrics, be it atmospheric rendering, fog or whatever, and this is actually where you do see noticeable variation between the systems, most noticeable in high contrast scenes. The lower the game's internal resolution, the less precision there are in the volumetrics, which can produce a very low-res tiling effect, as you can see here. Xbox One X and PS4 Pro work relatively well, with the Microsoft console having the edge, but the base consoles definitely struggle by comparison. There are moments where the vanilla PS4 can look rough, and where that's the case, Xbox One S looks considerably worse. One of the few visible artifacts that compromises the look of the game, but even so, the overall effect is transformative across the game, and again, are fully dynamic, realistically rendered, and add genuine weight and substance to many of the game's campaign levels. All console systems also use Infinity Ward's hybrid tile-based streaming system, with the game intelligently streaming in surrounding detail dynamically, allowing the consoles to feed the GPU with so much more detail on both the macro and the micro scale. It opens the door to the huge maps found in some of the multiplayer modes. But consider what we know about the next-gen consoles for the moment. Now, if the current-gen machines can deliver this much of an extra boost in detail thanks to this and the new geometry processing systems, imagine what that same technology can do with far more powerful GPUs working in combination with storage that's an order of magnitude faster. Yeah, it's mouth-watering to see what Infinity Ward is pioneering in the current generation to excellent effect, knowing what they'll get to play with hardware-wise from PlayStation 5 and Project Scarlet. So to recap then, from a campaign perspective at least, we have parity in features across the board, with resolution and its knock-on effects to the quality of effects like volumetrics to contend with. Xbox One S, PS4, PS4 Pro, Xbox One X, the integrity of the console power ladder is maintained. Except, well, it's actually not quite as simple as that. For now, at least. Work is ongoing on improving the technology behind Modern Warfare as... well, let's just say that Infinity Ward has plans, but for now at least, the series, the developer, and Modern Warfare in particular has a reputation for a singular focus on performance, on 60 frames per second on consoles. Now, Tom and Alex have already looked at the Sony systems, and yes, I will return to them for those all-important differentials, but for now, here's the lie of the land on the Xbox machines. Right from the beginning of the campaign, you can see that things are off pace for Xbox One S, with just a leisurely walk through the forest nudging the lower end of the 40s, and it can actually go lower than that. Alpha transparencies and volumetrics cause some real issues here, and remember, we're literally minutes into the campaign here. We've just begun the journey. Xbox One S also has the worst of what I think might be some kind of I/O related issue that persists into other versions of the game too. Okay, so I tried this on both internal and external storage with identical results, but there are momentary, distracting hitches, and the pause can be 100 to 133 milliseconds, like a momentary freeze frame if you like, and that's not great. Overall, I'd describe the campaign experience on Xbox One S as generally 40 to 60 frames per second in nature, with the potential to go lower in the really heavy scenes. In his video on PS4 performance, Tom noted that the base Sony machine can really have issues in the open area battle at the end of the proxy war, the 4th campaign mission. Interestingly, while Xbox One S doesn't exactly acquit itself with aplomb here, it does okay when stacked up against other stress points in the game. Similarly, the tightly confined clean house mission with a much smaller scale also plays out fine, though still nowhere near an absolutely locked 60 frames per second. Interestingly though, this stage does highlight how the game's volumetrics and lighting can incur a heavy load on the GPU. The initial entry point here is a simply stunning piece of rendering. The lighting, absolutely sublime, but you'll see how turning away from the volumetrics massively improves performance at this point. Moving on to Xbox One X, and you'll see that, again, the initial campaign section in the forest sees an immediate drop from 60 FPS, the difference being that an adaptive sync is in play, causing screen tearing at the top part of the display. In a 60 frames per second game, the render budget is 16.7 milliseconds, but if the frame is rendered over budget, even by a millisecond or two, you'll need to wait until the next display refresh, causing lag and stutter. So adaptive sync here allows for faster response when running just over render time budget, lowering latency. Interestingly though, it's only Xbox One X that uses it. The stuttering and tearing doesn't look great here, but it's not overly intrusive while frame rate remains in the mid-50s. But as we progress through the campaign, there are areas where the performance level can drop into the mid-40s. The hitching and stutter I saw on Xbox One S doesn't seem anything like as impactful here. But remember, the X does have a 50% increase to I/O bandwidth and a 31% uptick to CPU performance. The big open area at the end of the proxy war level also has issues on the X, but it sums up the extent of the issue really. 45 to 60 frames per second is our kind of performance window here, up against around 37 to 60 frames per second on the vanilla Xbox One. Quick shout out here to users that might be running their Xbox consoles on a 120Hz capable display. Here we're looking at the results running on Xbox One X. Now what's happening here is that VSync is enforced at the system level, so all of that tearing is automatically gone. It also means that when there is stutter, it's far less pronounced because the screen is updated every 8.3 milliseconds, not 16.7. So yes, if you want to smooth out performance on your Xbox One X, I would recommend giving the 120Hz mode a go. Yes, you will forfeit some resolution, but you should get a slightly smoother experience based on the results we're seeing here. Now, I didn't play the Sony console versions as much as Tom did, but I do think some head-to-heads are in order here. Despite the Xbox One S running at a noticeably lower resolution than the base PlayStation 4, returning to the initial campaign forest walkthrough shows a clear variance between the two machines, and as the airstrike kicks in, like-for-like content seems to give PS4 a 10 frames per second advantage at this point. Now, of course, the game is highly dynamic. The gap can close up depending on context, but as an at-a-glance look at how the two consoles run through the same campaign mission, well, this pretty much tells you everything you need to know. Clearly, PlayStation 4 isn't entirely stable at 60 FPS by any stretch, but the increased clarity and smoother overall performance represents a clearly improved experience. X versus Pro next, and a surprise. The gap between the base machines is nowhere near as pronounced when comparing their enhanced equivalents. and in the heat of battle the gap can close up, again depending on context. I did see some of what I think might be the I/O stutter here on the X, while the Pro was unaffected in that scenario, but you can see in this clip here that the same kind of momentary freeze frame I saw on the Xbox One S can indeed occur on the PlayStation 4 Pro too. Tom highlighted the end of the proxy war stage as a tough workout for the PS4, so permit me to unashamedly swipe some of his analysis footage here, as I didn't play up to that point on my Sony machines. And yeah, it's pretty clear here that in this taxing stress point the base PS4 can lose a chunk of its performance, while the Pro only has minor drops from 60 frames per second, which is a preferable turn of events compared to what we saw on the X. So let's summarise then. Modern Warfare on Xbox One S is feature complete. You aren't losing any engine features or content beyond Sony's exclusive bits. But in the taxing scenes, the console's output doesn't really hold up, in my personal opinion. PlayStation 4 is generally okay, but can have some issues, but I didn't really have any major complaints with it. There is, however, just a nagging feeling that a Call of Duty game, especially an Infinity Ward one, shouldn't budge from 60 frames per second in all but the most intense scenes, which, funnily enough, is exactly what the PlayStation 4 Pro delivers. The vast majority of the action plays out at 60, and even the most punishing campaign scenarios still remain north of 50 frames per second. And that leaves the Xbox One X as something of a puzzle, bearing in mind it just has a much more capable GPU and an increase to CPU frequencies too. It seems to me that the current performance profile seems to favour more resolution as opposed to attempting to stick more doggedly to a 60 frames per second frame rate target. Yes, there is additional clarity in the X image, and yes, you can see it, and it is significant. But Call of Duty is a game where I think temporal resolution, higher frame rate in other words, pays off a lot more in gameplay terms, and it emphasises some of the amazing work Infinity Ward has done here. You see, I'm not quite sure how, but the feel of this Call of Duty is just insanely good. Firefights are just sensational. This isn't really a digital Foundry thing to say because it's so subjective and I'm not sure it can actually be measured as such, but this game just feels right. So right, in fact. But it's a feeling that is so closely associated with solid, consistent performance that despite the X's extra pixels, I feel it's the Pro that offers the better campaign experience overall. And yes, there are obviously further dividends as you move on to PC with even more powerful hardware and higher spec displays. How this all translates into multiplayer is where we'll shift our focus next. But for now, that's everything I've got for you. Yes, I'm going to sign off now with the signature call for you to like and subscribe to support the work Digital Foundry does, while the bell, yes, it's there to be rung, and in exchange for your click, you'll get instant notifications whenever we post new DF content. Now this is a 4K encoded video, and to get the best possible experience watching it, check out our Patreon. See all of our work the way it's meant to be seen without anything like the level of compression artifacting YouTube delivers. And simultaneously you can feel all warm and fuzzy at the prospect of supporting the DF team more directly. But that's where I'm leaving things for now. Enjoy Modern Warfare if you've bought it or if you're considering a purchase. I know I certainly am. Anyway, that's all for now. Thanks for watching.